Hello and welcome to the HIV Cure podcast. My name is Marumo and we are back today. We are, almost, or should I say at the end of the season, the very first season. It's been an amazing season where we've been talking to different scientists, researchers, community advocates, as well as policymakers when it comes to the HIV space, the HIV cure and vaccine research, and also just learning from them the science behind everything, the progress made, how far we are with a cure, where the vaccine is, and everything in between. Today is episode 13. We're talking more of the future. We did have, I think around on episode 5, we talked about HIV vaccines, where we are with them now. And now we're looking into the future of HIV cure and vaccine research. That what is it that we should look forward to and what the future holds. And today I do have another beautiful researcher, scientist from this time, not from far, but very close to me, from South Africa. Hi.
Hi, Sakabo. Thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Yes, thank you for making the time to join and, to lend us your voice and educate us in everything around, HIV cure and HIV vaccine research.
Thank you.
Yes, before we start, can you kindly introduce yourself so that people get to know you better? I know you as Dr. Azzy, but, they need to know more about you.
Okay, yeah, so you are correct. Actually, I commonly go with Dr. Azwi to most people. Azwi is my first name. I'm Dr. Azwi Takalani. I am a medical doctor by training, but now really I practice mostly as a clinician scientist, and I work in mainly infectious diseases and vaccines, as well as therapies. And I mostly do HIV and TB vaccine work. So that's who I am. I am based right here as your neighbor in South Africa, in Johannesburg. And yeah, doing all this really exciting work at an exciting time from home.
Yes, I love that you're saying at an exciting time. I think this year, 2025, I think we were like at the crossroads. So much happened this year, and there's a lot of fear, there was a lot of doubt, and also hope to say that okay, now we really need to start talking and investing in HIV vaccine research, HIV cure research. And I met you last year at the IAS HIV Vaccine Advocacy Academy, and it was in December, and we were just talking how that it's going to be such a hard time to advocate for HIV vaccines and just working with our governments. And then January, so much happened, and now we're seeing our governments are leaning into to say that we need to actually look into HIV vaccine research, HIV cure, and just like opening up and easing into the conversation. So I'd say that it was like the timing was so perfect, and I'm glad that I got to meet you.
Yes, I was also really excited to be to be a faculty member in that advocacy training group. I think it's always just so exciting for people like me who've been in the game for long to see young upcoming advocates who are really passionate about the cause. I mean, I think I do have a resonance of when I was younger and had all this passion and zeal, and I think it's good to see that we can hand over the baton to you guys, because this is definitely not a 100-meter dash, right? This race is really more like a marathon. And so we really need to make sure that we keep the passion, the zeal going full steam at all times. So really, really honored to have met you, Sekabo, and really, really excited about the work that you and some of your younger counterparts are really doing in this space.
Thank you so much. And you're talking about, that this whole, HIV advocacy and research is a marathon. And, the funny thing is, last week, Saturday, I went for a marathon. And today I'm actually wearing my t-shirt that I got from that marathon. So it's really quite interesting. And now when we look, when you look ahead, from all these emerging technologies that we've also just been learning about here on the HIV Cure podcast, like gene editing and therapeutic vaccines. Do you believe that currently we do have the highest potential to transform HIV cure as well as HIV vaccine research in the next 10 years down the line?
Wow. And I like the fact that you are saying that 10 years, because I feel like ever since I've heard about HIV vaccine, preventive and cure work, we've always been measuring it in decades to say this decade, we're definitely getting the answer. But I think that your question was simple to transform. In the next decade, can we transform this landscape? And absolutely. I think that we may not have an answer for everybody in the next 10 years in terms of cure or prevention, but there will definitely be a big shift in the a big transformation in the space. If you look at particularly some of the emerging technologies that you've already alluded to, right? And I think that really the biggest transformation is going to come through a combination of these approaches. And this is why I'm saying we may not have an answer for everyone, but certainly a lot of people are going to benefit from these approaches and combination approaches. So what do I think is most exciting and the exciting technologies? You mentioned gene editing. So if we think about CRISPR, I think this is really one of the boldest kind of moves or therapeutic edges that we have at the moment that are showing the most promise. But what we do know about this intervention at the moment is that it is really, really expensive, and we don't necessarily have a clear way to make it scalable, right? So could this help a few people, certain populations? Absolutely. And I think the solution may really lie in, once the technology has been refined, how do we make it scalable in a way that it is widely acceptable? And this is where you guys kind of come in as community advocates, so that it's acceptable to our communities, because this is gene editing after all, and also in a way that it is affordable as well. So it needs to be acceptable, affordable, and obviously can reach many places without needing refined expertise or laboratories or procedures. So yeah, so I think gene editing is an exciting innovation, and we are definitely going to see or benefit a lot from this innovation in the next 10 years, and it's going to transform the landscape. Then obviously we do have our usual tools that we have been working on for decades. We do know that vaccines do prevent a lot of diseases, and that we are working on preventive and therapeutic vaccines as well for HIV. And these are looking promising. We do not have a candidate that is advancing, and I think you said you spoke about this in one of your earlier podcasts. We don't have a candidate that's advancing at the moment, but we have a strategy, and the strategy is yielding benefit. And as we see the different candidates, the results are moving in the correct direction, where we can start thinking about combining different vaccines into a solution that will end up probably with cure or even prevention. And then there's a whole lot of other work, of course, happening, like shock and kill, block and lock strategies, which, like I'm saying, the science is exciting, the approaches are moving at a rapid pace, and the answer will probably lie in a combination of these therapies. So combination in one person, or a combination to target different population groups to kind of reach to our end goal. Yeah.
All right. And also this year, talking about, a lot of researchers is that Africa, we don't do a lot of researches, but this year we've seen some of the breakthroughs being done here in Africa, HIV cure research in South Africa, the fresh study. And now from you, like from all of these breakthroughs, what breakthroughs or early signals in the current research gives you like a lot of confidence and hope to say that yes, maybe, a functional or sterilizing cure is possible in our lifetime?
Yeah. And so like you are saying, I think first of all, having transcending research. So research that is not just being done in one place already tells us that we are moving in the right direction, right? Because the more diversity you have, the diversity of the HIV strains and the diversity of populations that you're actually doing work and studies in, the more answers you get with asking one question. So if you focus on a discrete population, your answers are limited. But if you ask the same question in multiple populations, you actually yield a better outcome in terms of the answers or the depth of the answers or responses that you're getting to your candidates. So that is exciting that we're seeing a lot of work being done in Africa. And that is indeed, like you're saying, one of the early signals that we can really, really look to. I think one of the longest early signals that will always give me hope is that we do have controllers. We do have what we call natural controllers, and we won't go into the whole science of what is an elite controller or categorization of the types of controllers, but we have people who get infected with HIV, but they manage to control the virus. And I think for me, that has really been an anchor for my excitement and my hope, and it's the one thing that never curbed my enthusiasm, because if the human body can do it, if our immune systems can do it naturally, then as we grow in technology to understand the human body and different ways of imaging, testing the human body and understanding the immune system and its responses, surely that means one day we are going to figure out exactly what needs to be replicated artificially in order to make sure that what some people can do naturally, is then replicated and then promulgated into other populations. So that is like maybe an early signal that dates before the work that we are doing in Africa. And like I said, it's really a big anchor of my hope and what keeps me going when I do this kind of work where we've kind of been at it for many years and do not actually have an answer yet. And then another signal, I think, again, is that in the vaccine strategies, right, the vaccine work now has a clear strategy, which is inducing broadly neutralizing antibodies. And we have seen that in the trials that we are currently doing, which are early phase trials, and we call them discovery medicine, we are actually starting to understand the cell lineages and the precursor cells and down the line, as they mature towards becoming broadly neutralizing antibodies. And more, we are identifying immunogens or antigens or that can trigger or activate these cells to move in the correct direction towards producing broadly neutralizing antibodies. So that is another very exciting early signal to say we are moving in the correct direction. I think also the advent of mRNA vaccines, we saw how they changed the landscape when we had the COVID pandemic. And so there has been a lot more of investment in building up this mRNA platform for HIV vaccines, both preventative and therapeutic. And that again is an exciting maturation of different platforms for vaccines also coming together or growing. So that's yet another early signal that is pointing us in the correct direction. And I don't want to be held to account about this 10 years. Are we going to do it in 10 years? But I definitely think that in my lifetime, Sekabo, this is definitely doable.
Yes. So, and also I like that you mentioned COVID-19. And I think one of the things that constantly come up is that, we saw COVID come in 2020, and within a year, vaccines were out, we're getting all these vaccines. But with HIV, it's been there for a long time. We're always hearing that, ongoing research, and we still don't have a vaccine. And even COVID now, we're starting to forget about it. We took our shots and everything was just fine. But HIV vaccines, we still don't have them. So what makes it so hard to develop an HIV vaccine?
Okay. So I think that, first of all, maybe just to talk about COVID and leave the COVID story behind. I think, first of all, COVID is a much simpler virus in terms of its structure. And so like other viruses that we already have vaccines, and it didn't take so long to develop a vaccine because of how they are structurally, right? Speaks to why we were able to get a COVID vaccine so quickly. But the second point, which I do not think gets enough airtime or people are not so aware of, is that the COVID vaccines actually were built on the platform, the infrastructure, and the systems that were being developed for HIV vaccine work. So essentially, all the HIV vaccine platform systems, networks, researchers, they kind of pivoted. We all pivoted in that period to say, how can we deal with the current pandemic, knowing what we know, right? And so that is why really those are the two main reasons why we were able to get a COVID vaccine so quickly. Now, speaking about HIV, why is it so difficult and why is it taking so long? I think converse to the simplicity of the structure of the COVID-19 vaccine or SARS-CoV-2, then we have the HIV virus, which really has a very complicated structure. In addition to that, it has these kind of sugar shields, right, that protect so all the areas that you want to target on the virus, to target it, to prevent it from binding to cells. A lot of them are also coated or hidden in what I could describe in an understandable way in a shield, like a sugar shield that kind of blocks antibodies from attaching and then neutralizing the virus. And then also the virus mutates extremely fast. So there was this picture that was circulating probably in the journals and not in mainstream media during COVID times, really showing the comparison between the mutations and the complexity of the HIV virus and SARS-CoV-2. And I mean, you couldn't even say it was 100th. The SARS-CoV-2 was 100th. I mean, it was exponentially like 1,000, 10,000 times less complicated and with fewer mutations in comparison to the HIV or the HIV virus, right? So all these things make it way more difficult for us to get an HIV vaccines. And then obviously the HIV virus also goes into the cells, and then it forms reservoirs, right, deep within the immune system, where then it is not easy for penetration into those levels to kind of create like a sterile cure or even maybe at times a functional cure. So all these things make it really, really complicated when we're looking at developing an HIV vaccine. But having said that, there's hope. I think we're starting to understand the fact that we can articulate the problems. So awareness is the first thing. Means that now we can start working on solutions to circumvent these issues. Yeah.
All right. No, thank you for that. And also for just speaking more to the fact that, for us to get those COVID vaccines, it was just from from research that has been ongoing over the years, HIV research that has been going over the years, and that it's not just that COVID, it was just quick and then there you have it. And then earlier on, you talked about, you mentioned about therapeutic vaccines and preventive HIV vaccines. So can you please explain the difference between these two, preventive HIV vaccine and therapeutic HIV vaccines? And please just try and use simple terms, yeah?
Yes. I've really been trying, but you should actually, like, if I use a term that won't translate very well into your audience, you should just like say, Azwi, please, change that word.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to be called out on this platform. So in terms of preventive vaccines, here we are really talking about people who are HIV negative, right? And we are saying, similar to all the other diseases that we have in our immunization schedule for children, where we say that before you are infected with this virus, can we give you a vaccine which is going to mimic or copy the immune response that your immune system would give if the virus had entered or entered your body or infected you. So we are talking about negative people and how we can get an immune response that will then, when faced with the HIV, the virus, it would then block the infection or prevent the infection. So that is what a preventive vaccine is. And on the other hand, a therapeutic vaccine is us really looking at people who are already living with HIV and saying, how can we expand on the immune response that you already have, the small immune response that was not able to control the virus, but some immune response happened. But how can we expand that immune response so that you are able to control the virus? And basically, when we say controlling the virus, we are mostly talking about what we call functional cure, which means that you stop the virus from replicating or making more copies of itself. And so without making more copies of itself, then it won't be any to circulate or to further, have an impact on your immune system. So that would be training the immune system to control the virus without having to take antiretrovirals on a continual basis. So that's really the difference between prevention and therapy in terms of vaccines. What I do want to say is, Sakaba, when I started in HIV vaccine work, and I came from the prevention world, and I'm going to say I came from the prevention world because when I started, there were two camps, and we were looking at two different approaches on how to do the prevention and the therapy. But as we grew more in the understanding of this science, the two camps have merged into one, because we are now realizing that actually the solution or the immune response that has to be elucidated or that these vaccines must trigger is probably going to be the same or similar. And so, first of all, this joining of camps has meant that we have more minds thinking around the same thing and solving one singular problem. So, like I said, really, really exciting times to be working in vaccine research for HIV.
Yeah, so that's really amazing. And also just to see like how research has evolved over the years also, and sort of like come to like a one solution, or more of us working together from different angles but towards the same goals, or to say that this is how we can best achieve this. And talking about, achievements or heading towards the promised land now, can you just share with us that are there any current HIV vaccine trials that are ongoing that show that the promise is here? We're not too far from it. And if possible, can you also just share or give examples of those clinical trials that are happening here in Africa, or those that are happening in low income countries?
Okay. So yes, like I said, now we have a strategy, and the strategy is to work on vaccines that will produce broadly neutralizing antibodies. And basically that just means these kind of soldiers that will neutralize most of the vaccine. So broadly neutralizing. Okay. So this is the strategy that all vaccine research is working towards at the moment. And now trying to move from, okay, we have seen in some people have produced these controllers, have produced these broadly neutralizing antibodies, and these are the broadly neutralizing antibodies that we have. So can we figure out which cells develop, mature, and finally become the broadly neutralizing antibodies? And we are starting to see a few candidates that are vaccine candidates that target those cells and are moving. So the process of moving from what we call a precursor cell, or let's just call it an ordinary immune system cell, to a cell that produces a broadly neutralizing antibodies against the HIV virus. It's not like a one-step thing. It's like a maturation thing, right? It's like a child gets born, and then they become an infant, they learn to walk, they become a toddler, then they become a teenager, then we say, okay, they're an adult now. So how do we shepherd along that process from being a little baby into being an adult, right? And so we have many, many of these trials, and we have networks like IAVI, the HIV vaccines trial network that I'm part of, and some African-led networks like the Brilliance Network, and many, many other partners that are working on these different vaccine candidates. What we know is that, before, when we were growing up, we always had like one superhero, like Superman or Batman, and then Marvel came, and then they introduced like superheroes working in a group, right? So this is where we are now. We are starting to identify the different superheroes that we are going to put together, and they are going to kind of conquer this virus that has been terrorizing our continent for years. So I've mentioned some of the networks that are doing different work around this, and the projects that they are doing in Africa, ongoing work from these particular networks and many, many other partners.
Yes, and you're talking about the different networks and researches that are currently ongoing, and obviously I am interested like in Africa mostly. So then, how are we making sure that or how are researchers? How are you making sure that when it comes to these researches, we don't see clinical trials being done in Africa, and then after that we won't have access to them? So how are researchers making sure that when it comes to cure and vaccines are going to benefit everyone, and not just the rich countries, and that everyone everywhere will be able to access these interventions when they they are available?
Yeah. That's a very important question, right? Because ensuring global access is something that will not automatically happen. I think we now understand how the world works, right? And that this is something that we probably have to advocate for actively, and also build systems that ensure this. So how do we go about this? Okay. So first of all, one win that we have is, like you said, we've got more clinical research happening in the African space. Now, that already removes one barrier. We spoke about the complexity of the HIV virus, and we said that the way it's so complex and matures, and this has led to there really being the epidemics in different continents looking different. So the different strains fueling the epidemic in different continents. So the fact that we also have research happening in our setting already makes us hop over the first hurdle, which is that we will also develop solutions concurrently that work for the strains on our continent. So that's part number one. And also, without even having to elaborate further, I mean, we have the highest burden of the HIV epidemic, right? So number one, we're winning. Number two, we have seen that scientists and researchers are really starting to think about access from early on and to build it into agreements when clinical trial agreements are made. We have an example of this with lenacapavir. So we have seen how those agreements were made in the beginning. If this works, and lenacapavir is PrEP, for those who do not know, it's long-acting PrEP that you take one shot in 6 months. So it prevents HIV acquisition, right? And so the discussion from early on was, if this works, then we want to ensure that there will be no delay in access for African countries. And so this is kind of like the first example where we really started to see results. And within 18 months, we have many African countries already licensing lenacapavir. We have funders already coming in for lenacapavir to be available. And we have obviously the developer and the manufacturer being open to that and working on manufacturing agreements as well as tech transfer agreements. So this example is really what we should, it's a precedent. It can be done, right? It has been done for lenacapavir and it can be done. And this is what we really should be doing for vaccine work. The moment we see promise, all these need to be pre-negotiated with whoever is going to be the final developer of the vaccines or whatever innovative strategy that may result in HIV cure or HIV prevention. And then most of all, Takalani, and this speaks to the work that you are doing, it's community advocacy. Community advocacy is really important. It is when the researchers stand up to say, hey, can you see we are 5 minutes away from the solution? The community has to be like, oh yes, we've known when you were an hour away from the solution, and we've mobilized our people, because it is only when we come together and speak in one voice and push for one thing that we get some real answers.
I love how you also just explained or just gave an example of lenacapavir of happening and just pointing out the importance of partnerships. And now let's look into like the global partnerships that have shaped HIV science over the years. That what kind of collaborations do you still think that we need in order for us to accelerate the path towards an HIV cure or an HIV vaccine, especially when we're looking from the point of like governments, industry, leaders, and the community? Like, what is it that we need to do globally when it comes to this?
Okay, so I think the first example that kind of materialized instantaneously by itself is when the science between prevention and cure started to come together, right? And that meant that automatically just brought the researchers from both camps together. But when we talk about researchers, we're not only just talking about the people who do the research, preclinical and clinical research. We're also talking about people who do the implementation science parts. And now we need to bring those kind of global partnerships in play to say, let us just imagine this is the day we have the vaccine or a solution. How are we going to go about it so that it is not only at that point that we start to think about solutions. What would a rollout look like? Are we going to start with cure? Are we going to start with prevention? Are we going to start with the elderly, the young? We need to answer all those questions. So already we need to be thinking about bringing along our implementation science researchers to join the research camp and to share expertise and be partners in really moving this forward. That's point number one. And then secondly, we need to be thinking about, and I just went to a conference recently where one of the scientists was speaking about translating science into policy and how as researchers, we really need the skills to write policy briefs, right? Because when you publish a scientific journal when you publish a peer-reviewed article in a scientific journal that has limited access, only other scientists are reading that journal. Now, how do we take that information and put it in the hands of decision makers like government, right? So that they can already start thinking about, if this is the information and these are the strategies, these are the policies that we need to be thinking about implementing. And maybe in preparation, this is some of the infrastructure in terms that we need to be building leading up to this kind of thing. And also, we speaking about funding, our governments really need to also offer kind of some long-term anchoring of funding, right, that will make this a possible solution. So you started earlier by talking about, we met in December and then January, there was this evolving landscape of funding and funding being pulled from lower and middle income countries, particularly African countries, and we bore the brunt of that. So we need to be working with partnerships, not only with government, but also with philanthropy all while. So other funders, and thinking about how do we then make this a realizable, fundable solution and not just a scientific solution that may remain in the lab or in the pharmacy, which at some levels the COVID vaccine did become that. I know certainly in my country we had to destroy, or a lot of the vaccines that were procured were actually not administered, right? So we don't want that kind of scenario. And then we then need to be thinking about, okay, if we are saying, and maybe borrowing also from the lenacapavir example, if we are saying that we need to manufacture at scale, how do we ramp up manufacturing capabilities within the continent? And how do we think about tech transfer? So when you do a technology transfer, you need to transfer it to a partner who is able to run with the technology or receive the transfer, right? So we need to be building up our entities in a way that they are ready for that technology transfer when it's ready, when it comes, and also ready to manufacture large amounts of the vaccine or to scale up the strategy, whatever form it may come in. And then again, most importantly, we need to engage the communities. We saw a real example during COVID, and I always say that the way that HIV research pivoted into COVID research, that was almost like an example or a dry run for us to see all the things that could go wrong. And one of the things that went really wrong is that we did not bring our communities with us. They did not understand the the design of the studies, how you carry out studies, what is the safety pause, how do you report on events, what does it mean that there's a safety event or a related safety event, all those things. They didn't understand all these things. So that opened up the door to misinformation. So when we bring our communities into this collaboration, we're going to make sure that we actually have actually covered all the different stakeholders, and we move really as a unit towards making this a realizable solution.
And talking of funding, we've also seen how, funding cycle can determine the speed of scientific progress. Like earlier on, yeah, we saw the funding cuts, USAID, NIH, and some of these funding, we did see that it affected a lot of studies, especially here in Africa, that some of the studies had to be stopped. Clinical trials that they were affected adversely. So in terms of investment, what investment gaps still exist currently, and how can the global community collectively bridge these gaps that are there?
Yeah, and so I think infectious diseases in their nature, and because of where the burden of disease lies, they are really vulnerable to things that happened like earlier this year when we had funding cuts, right? But overall, before we even think about what can we do in the future, we need to acknowledge that even right now, with the excitement that we have about all the work that is ongoing, this is a very underfunded project, right? This is a very underfunded disease, right? And we should really be looking at how we even scale up the funding right now. So, and I think the solution to that is really going towards stronger domestic budgets, right? So we need to invest in the solutions that are going to benefit us most as a continent. And then secondly, we need to think about predictable global funding. So shouldn't be funding cycles of 3 years that you can fund a bit of this and a bit of that. Like we already started by saying in our discussion, this is a marathon. It's not a 100-meter dash, right? So we need to have funding cycles that emulate the journey. So funding needs to be pledged over longer periods of time as opposed to 3 to 5 year cycles. And that will definitely stabilize and make it more predictable. I mean, some people already, even before these drastic funding cuts, but some people already were looking at HIV vaccine research and HIV cure research overall as being somewhere where there is unstable employment. So already when you have something like that, you cannot attract the best minds, and you cannot attract them for long as well, because people are kind of like entering into the space to learn skills and then diverting into other places. So if really the funding is more predictable and over longer periods, and it has a domestic investment base, then definitely we will see that the research will move faster, and impacts like what happened with the sudden funding cuts this year, it will minimize impact from things like that, because then we will already have a sustainable baseline or a cushy base or reserve to fall back onto. So really, yes, we need to really think about funding in these ways. And then, of course, also when we think about funding, we shouldn't necessarily always think about funding programs. We also need to think about building systems, training personnel. So we need to be really producing more scientists, more manufacturer or technicians in biotechnicians in the manufacturing space. So we need to be thinking about also what are the human resources that are needed, and what is the infrastructure that is going to be needed to make this HIV cure research a reality, and then investing in all those things with more stable funding or predictable global funding.
Yes, and also when we're talking about research, that you did mention earlier on the importance of community. So now the question comes to the fact that what role do communities play in shaping the future of cure and vaccine research, and most importantly, how can community members, especially young people, because I am a young person, especially these young people in advocacy, education, and even those in research, how can we make sure that they're playing a role when it comes to shaping the future of research?
Yeah, I think it's first of all in the realization of young people and community that they are essential for the next few steps of this journey or the next few laps of this marathon, right? And once there is that realization, I think that is empowering when you know that your voice actually matters. And how do we then say your voice matters, or how can you use your voice for influence? I think I shared the story with you when we were at the academy that actually my participation in HIV research started when I was a medical student, and we were part of the treatment action campaign. And it was at a time where there were no antiretroviral therapies available in our country. And so people then who contracted HIV, you could say then the HIV was going to advance and they were going to die. And it was this realization of walking around in the wards, working in the wards, and being also a junior medical doctor, and realizing that, well, people have no hope, and finding that voice to say, okay, right now I cannot speak as a doctor, or I cannot speak as a scientist, neither can I speak as a policymaker, but I can speak as a young person, and I can definitely say our government needs a solution. And guess what? That activism from the community and young people resulted in South Africa having the largest HIV treatment program in the whole world. So first of all, motivation to say your voice matters and it can make a really big difference. The important thing is that you need to join your voice with other people. And so also a reminder to communities that they are not just on the receiving end. They are actually co-designers of the research, right? They are not just waiting for the research scientists to come and say, this is the research we are doing. They have to be saying, well, what research are we going to be doing next? And then reviewing the strategy and contributing to the strategy. So co-designers. And how do communities and young people do that? They do that by participating in community advisory boards. They can lead peer education movements, something like this podcast. They can influence their micro environment to fight stigma, to create pockets of conversation, or spaces where conversation can be held openly and shared, where we can then start doing away with misinformation and building the correct pillars on correct information that is trustworthy as well. We have also many structures. We have ethics committees, right? That is an avenue for the community and young people to participate in there. And then we have many, many advocacy groups that young people can join. So not everyone can start an advocacy movement, but when they do, we really, really appreciate them. And thank you, Sakabo, for this podcast. But many young people can be like the young me who joined an advocacy group, which was the Treatment Action Campaign back then, to move towards seeing these kind of solutions. So this is really how we can all knit together as community and young people to move really to continue this journey.
Yes, thank you for such insightful, conversations, and also just enlightening us on some of the information that maybe we had like little to no information about and just needed, more clarity on that. And then just finally to close it off, we want to just give hope that from you as a researcher now, what gives you the greatest hope for the future of HIV cure and vaccine science? And what should our listeners hold on to as we move on to the next chapter of this journey that we know that I think 2025 is more of a new chapter, or going into 2026, new chapter for research for the HIV response, locally, regionally, as well as internationally.
Okay, so again, the things that keep me hopeful, I've already mentioned two. Number one, I am part of the generation that saw an HIV diagnosis, meaning that it is, in inverted commas, a death sentence, that you would eventually progress to advanced HIV and succumb to the disease. So hope is that already that has pivoted from that to a manageable chronic condition, right? So that gives me hope. My second anchor of hope, which is so my main anchor of hope, which I've already spoken about, is the fact that we have human beings, live human beings, whose immune systems have been able to combat the virus and control the virus. So again, this means that we just have to, as researchers, we just really have to understand and mimic those responses. So that is almost like, when you're sailing at sea, and at least you know your destination, and you have a compass to get to the destination. Wonderful. That is great hope for me. But what is even more encouraging is that even as we move through this journey, we are seeing a stronger community involvement, a new generation of advocates like you, and we are seeing that even in the science, we are starting to get those early signals that are saying, yes, we are moving in the right direction. And of course, we do have a few people who have been cured from HIV. So everything looks impossible until it is done. So the impossible part is already gone, because we already have people who are living with having been cured, and we have people who are living and controlling without any intervention. So these things really give me a lot of hope that the space that we are working in, the breakthroughs that we have in the sphere of science, and the new prevention tools like we spoke about earlier, gene editing, all these things are going to bring us to a solution. So a renewed hope, really. I think maybe 2025 started with a bit of a damper with the funding cuts, but like you're saying, 2026 is starting on an absolute high, because in addition to the funding cuts having happened, the resilience of the science has shown itself. And so we really can only go higher from this point.
Wow, thank you so much for, giving us hope, and also just showing that, progress was, we were and we are still making that progress despite everything that has been happening or that is happening, and we are resilient. And then now I'll be asking you just a fun bonus question to say that now, if you were a superhero, right? And you had the powers. What power would you give all the scientists in the world to make sure that absolutely no one is left behind when it comes to this fight towards an HIV cure or towards us finding an HIV vaccine?
I think the most complicated problems are always solved by the simplest strategies. and the power to come together, put our minds, resources, and our ideas together. Really what Ubuntu is. I am because we are. If we all had that deep within us, enshrined in us, and we live that in the work that we do, whether you are working as a community advocate, whether you are a community member who has access to the correct information and you promulgate it, whether you're a scientist, and regardless of which sphere you're working in, but we come together and work as one. Really, being united and putting our minds together, that is, I think, the ultimate superpower that we need, and not just for HIV cure, but pretty much to solve all the global problems that we could ever experience.
Wow, wow, wow. What a way to close off season 1 of the HIV Cure podcast, and just looking into the future of an HIV cure, or the future of an HIV vaccine research. Thank you once again, Dr. Azzy, for the time that you made for us to record this and to talk more, as well as, most importantly, enlighten us and give us hope. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate, and it was quite an honor to be on the platform.
Right. I hope that you learned a lot, and looking forward to the next season of the HIV Cure podcast. Do catch the other episodes, and if you have any questions, as always, feel free to ask in the comment section, and some of them we will send to our guests, and they will be able to explain to you if you need any clarity. Thank you so much for tuning in and just learning with us. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.